The blood on Martha Harrison's white cotton dress was still wet when she heard the first scream echoing from beneath the floorboards of Redemption Creek's jailhouse. She had been tending to young Billy Thompson's broken arm when the unholy wail pierced through the wooden planks, causing the boy to whimper and clutch her sleeve with his good hand. The sound was distinctly human, yet carried an anguish so profound that it seemed to rise from the very bowels of hell itself. Martha's hands trembled as she finished wrapping Billy's arm, her mind racing with possibilities that defied rational explanation. Sheriff Tom Harrison had left 3 days prior with a posse to track the Mendez gang into the Chiricahua Mountains, leaving her alone to tend to the town's minor ailments and injuries. As the only person in Redemption Creek with any medical knowledge, she had grown accustomed to the sight of blood and the sounds of pain, but nothing had prepared her for the bone-chilling cry that had just emanated from beneath her feet. The jailhouse sat on the eastern edge of town, its adobe walls weathered by years of harsh Arizona sun and occasional monsoon rains. Built directly over what the town's founders had claimed was solid bedrock, the structure had always seemed as permanent and unchanging as the desert mountains that surrounded their small community. Yet now, as Martha sent Billy home with strict instructions to keep his arm immobilized, she found herself questioning everything she thought she knew about the building that had served as both courthouse and detention center for nearly 2 decades. The afternoon sun cast long shadows through the barred windows as Martha began her systematic examination of the jailhouse floor. The screaming had stopped as abruptly as it had begun, leaving behind an oppressive silence that seemed to press against her eardrums like thick cotton. She moved methodically from room to room, pressing her ear to the floor and tapping gently with the heel of her boot, searching for any hollow sounds that might indicate empty space beneath the planks. It was in the corner cell where dangerous prisoners were typically held that she first noticed the irregularity. The floorboard near the back wall produced a distinctly different sound when struck, a hollow resonance that suggested a cavity of considerable size lay beneath. Martha's heart began to pound as she examined the board more closely, noting that while it appeared to be nailed down like the others, the nails seemed newer, their heads still bearing the bright metallic sheen of recent installation. Working carefully with a knife from her medical bag, Martha began to pry at the edges of the suspicious board. The wood came up more easily than she had anticipated, revealing not the solid earth she expected, but the beginning of a crude wooden ladder that descended into absolute darkness. The air that rose from the opening carried with it a mixture of odors that made her stomach churn: unwashed human bodies, stagnant water, and something else, something that reminded her of the slaughterhouse behind Jameson's butcher shop. Martha retrieved a kerosene lantern from the sheriff's office and lit it with shaking hands. The flame cast dancing shadows on the walls as she positioned herself at the edge of the opening, straining to see into the depths below. The ladder descended approximately 12 feet before disappearing into what appeared to be a horizontal tunnel carved directly from the desert floor. The walls showed crude tool marks, as if the passage had been excavated by hand using nothing more than picks and shovels. As she lowered the lantern into the opening, Martha caught sight of something that made her blood run cold. Carved into the earthen wall near the base of the ladder were dozens of tally marks, scratched deep into the packed dirt as if someone had been keeping count of days, weeks, perhaps even months. Below these marks, barely visible in the flickering light, she could make out what appeared to be names etched into the soil: Sarah Mitchell, James Crawford, Little Mary Santos. The names belonged to people who had vanished from Redemption Creek over the past several years, individuals whose disappearances had been attributed to various explanations by the townspeople. Sarah Mitchell, the young schoolteacher, had supposedly left town to marry a suitor in California. James Crawford, a prospector, was believed to have headed north to try his luck in the Colorado goldfields. Little Mary Santos had simply wandered too far from home one evening, her body presumably claimed by the desert predators that prowled the outskirts of town. Martha's medical training had taught her to maintain composure in even the most disturbing circumstances, but the implications of what she was seeing threatened to overwhelm her carefully maintained professional demeanor. If these people were truly beneath the jailhouse, if they had been living in some underground warren while the town above went about its daily business, then someone in Redemption Creek was responsible for orchestrating their concealment. Someone with access to the jailhouse, someone with the authority to prevent questions from being asked too persistently. The thought that her own husband might be involved in whatever horror was taking place beneath their feet caused Martha to grip the lantern so tightly that her knuckles turned white. Tom Harrison was an honest man, she told herself, a man who had dedicated his life to maintaining law and order in their small community. Yet she could not ignore the fact that he possessed the keys to every lock in the building, that he alone had unrestricted access to the jailhouse at all hours of day and night. As Martha debated whether to descend the ladder or return to town to seek help, she heard voices drifting up from the darkness below. The words were indistinct at first, mere whispers that might have been mistaken for the wind moving through underground passages. But as she listened more intently, she began to make out fragments of conversation conducted in hushed, urgent tones. "The woman upstairs," came a voice, thin and reedy with exhaustion, "she knows we're here." "How long before they come for us?" asked another voice, this one belonging to what sounded like a young girl. "Quiet," commanded a third voice, deeper and more authoritative than the others, "she might still leave. We can't let them know how many of us there are." Martha realized with growing horror that the people below were aware of her presence, that they had likely heard her footsteps and seen the light from her lantern penetrating their subterranean world. The knowledge that she was being observed from below while she peered down at them created a sensation of vertigo that had nothing to do with the physical act of looking into the depths. She was the observer and the observed, the hunter and potentially the hunted. The authoritative voice spoke again, and this time Martha was certain she recognized it, though the recognition came with a shock that nearly caused her to drop the lantern. "Mrs. Harrison," the voice called softly, "we know you can hear us. Please, we need your help." The voice belonged to Ezekiel Crow, a man who had been imprisoned in the very cell where Martha now crouched nearly 8 months prior. Crow had been awaiting transfer to the territorial prison in Yuma when he had simply vanished one night, his cell found empty with no sign of forced escape. The official explanation had been that he had somehow picked the lock and fled into the desert, though many in town had privately questioned how a man could disappear so completely from a locked cell without assistance. "Mr. Crow," Martha called down into the darkness, her voice barely above a whisper, "is that truly you?" "It is, ma'am," came the reply, and now Martha could detect the note of desperate hope that colored the man's words. "And I'm not alone down here. There are 23 of us, Mrs. Harrison. 23 souls who the good people of Redemption Creek believe to be either dead or departed." The number struck Martha like a physical blow. 23 people, living beneath the town in conditions she could only imagine. The scope of what she was discovering seemed to expand with each revelation, growing from a simple mystery into something that challenged her understanding of the very community in which she had lived for the past 12 years. "How long have you been down there?" Martha asked, though part of her feared the answer. "Some of us have been here since the tunnel was first dug," Crow replied, his voice growing stronger now that communication had been established. "That would be nigh on 4 years now. Others, like young Mary Santos, have only been with us for a few months." Martha's grip on the lantern tightened again as she processed this information. If Crow was telling the truth, then the underground community had been growing steadily for years while she and the other residents of Redemption Creek had remained completely unaware of its existence. The careful planning and coordination required to maintain such a deception suggested involvement from multiple individuals, people with significant influence within the town's social and economic hierarchy. "Who is responsible for this?" Martha asked, though she dreaded hearing the answer that might implicate her husband or other people she had known and trusted for years. "That's a conversation best had face to face, Mrs. Harrison," Crow replied after a moment's hesitation. "But I will tell you this much. The men responsible wear respectable clothes and attend church on Sundays. They sit at the head table during town meetings and their names are painted on storefront windows throughout Redemption Creek." The implications of Crow's words sent a chill through Martha that had nothing to do with the cool air rising from the underground passage. If prominent community members were involved in whatever was happening beneath the jailhouse, then her discovery placed her in considerable danger. She was not merely uncovering a crime, she was potentially threatening the carefully constructed facade that allowed respected citizens to maintain their positions while engaging in acts that defied both law and human decency. Martha made her decision with the sudden clarity that sometimes accompanies moments of extreme crisis. She gathered her medical bag, secured the lantern's handle between her teeth, and began her descent into the darkness below. Each step down the crude wooden ladder carried her further from the familiar world of Redemption Creek and deeper into a reality that existed in the shadows beneath civilized society. The tunnel at the bottom of the ladder stretched in both directions, disappearing beyond the reach of her lantern's glow. The walls were reinforced with timber salvaged from various sources, and Martha could see that considerable effort had been expended to make the passages stable and navigable. This was not the desperate excavation of escaped prisoners, it was the carefully planned construction project of people with resources, knowledge, and long-term objectives. Ezekiel Crow emerged from the shadows like a specter, his once robust frame now gaunt from months of inadequate nutrition and limited sunlight. His clothes hung loose on his diminished frame, and his hair had grown long and unkempt, but his eyes retained the intelligence and determination that Martha remembered from his brief time as a prisoner in the cell above. "Mrs. Harrison," he said, extending a hand that trembled slightly with emotion, "I cannot express how grateful we are to see you. We had begun to fear that we would die down here without anyone ever knowing what became of us." Behind Crow, other figures began to emerge from the deeper recesses of the tunnel system. Martha recognized several faces despite the changes wrought by their subterranean existence. Sarah Mitchell appeared far older than her 24 years, her once bright eyes now holding a haunted quality that spoke of experiences no person should endure. James Crawford moved with the careful gait of someone nursing chronic pain, and Martha noted that his left arm hung at an unnatural angle, suggesting an injury that had healed improperly without medical attention. Young Mary Santos stepped forward last, and the sight of the child nearly broke Martha's resolve entirely. The girl who had vanished 6 months prior while playing near the creek had been transformed from a bright, energetic 8-year-old into a solemn shadow who seemed to carry the weight of adult concerns on her small shoulders. "What has been done to you?" Martha whispered, her voice catching with emotion as she surveyed the assembled group. "We are the workforce, Mrs. Harrison," Crow replied grimly, "for an operation that requires absolute secrecy and workers who will never speak of what they have seen. We dig and we carry and we keep our mouths shut, because the alternative is far worse than this underground existence." As if summoned by his words, the sound of footsteps echoed through the tunnel from somewhere in the distance, accompanied by voices that grew louder with each passing moment. The residents of the underground community immediately began to disperse, melting back into the shadows with the practiced efficiency of people who had learned to make themselves invisible at a moment's notice. "Someone's coming," Crow hissed urgently, "someone who cannot know that you have spoken with us. Mrs. Harrison, you must decide quickly whether you are with us or against us, because there will be no middle ground once they arrive." The approaching footsteps grew closer, and Martha could now make out individual voices among the sound of boots on packed earth. To her horror, she recognized one of the voices as belonging to Mayor Benjamin Cartwright, a man she had known socially for years and whose wife served alongside her on the church auxiliary committee. The casual tone of his conversation with his unseen companion suggested that his presence in the underground tunnels was routine, that he was as familiar with this hidden world as he was with the streets of Redemption Creek above. Martha extinguished her lantern and pressed herself against the tunnel wall, her heart pounding so loudly that she feared it might betray her location. In the absolute darkness that followed, she could hear every sound with crystal clarity, the measured pace of the approaching men, the soft rustling of the underground residents as they concealed themselves, and her own ragged breathing as she struggled to maintain control over her rising panic. The voices grew clear enough for Martha to distinguish individual words, and what she heard confirmed her worst fears about the scope of the conspiracy she had uncovered. Mayor Cartwright was discussing production schedules and profit margins with his companion, referring to the underground residents as units and debating the advisability of acquiring additional workers to meet increased demand from unnamed buyers. As the men passed within mere feet of Martha's hiding place, she caught a glimpse of the mayor's companion in the light of their torch and felt her world tilt on its axis. Walking beside Benjamin Cartwright, deep in conversation about human trafficking and forced labor, was her own husband, Sheriff Tom Harrison. The torch light flickered against the tunnel walls as Martha Harrison pressed herself into the shadows, watching her husband of 12 years discuss human trafficking with Mayor Benjamin Cartwright as casually as planning a church social. Tom Harrison's voice carried clearly through the underground passage as he gestured toward unexplored sections of tunnel. "The new shaft should be completed within the month, Benjamin. With additional workers, we could triple our silver output before winter," Tom said, his badge catching the torchlight in a way that now seemed mocking. Martha felt bile rise in her throat as the scope of their operation became clear. This was a sophisticated mining operation using enslaved labor to extract precious metals from beneath Redemption Creek. The missing persons, the unexplained disappearances, all carefully orchestrated to provide workers who could toil in absolute secrecy. Through breaks in the tunnel wall, Martha glimpsed the horrifying reality. Dozens of people, including Dr. Samuel Henley, who had supposedly moved to Denver, working in cramped conditions with the hollow expressions of those who had abandoned hope. Among them labored Sarah Mitchell, James Crawford, and little Mary Santos, all presumed dead or departed. "The Harrison woman has been asking questions," Cartwright said suddenly, freezing Martha's blood. "We may need to consider adding her to our workforce before she becomes a problem." Tom was quiet for a long moment before responding with weary resignation. "Martha is my wife, Benjamin. There has to be another way." "Your wife is a threat to an operation that has made us wealthy men," Cartwright replied coldly. "She has medical training that would be useful down here. The choice is yours, Tom, but if you cannot handle the situation, others will." As the men moved deeper into the tunnels, Ezekiel Crow emerged from the shadows near Martha. His expression was grim as he confirmed her worst fears. "Now you know the truth, Mrs. Harrison. Your husband arranged my apparent escape from the cell above. He gave me a choice: join their workforce or die. Most of us made the same decision." Crow's voice carried the weight of months of underground captivity. Martha struggled with the revelation that her comfortable life had been built on human suffering. Every dress she wore, every meal she ate, had been purchased with blood money from enslaved workers. What happened to those who refused to cooperate? Martha asked. Crow's expression darkened. "There is a forbidden section of tunnel where we sometimes hear sounds that suggest their fate was neither quick nor merciful." Footsteps above indicated Tom had returned to the jailhouse. His voice echoed down through the cell floor opening, lacking any surprise. "Martha, I know you're down there. We need to talk." Crow gripped her arm urgently. "Don't go up there. Once they have you above ground, you'll never return alive. Your husband has already made his choice." But Martha understood she couldn't remain below indefinitely. "If I don't return, get word to the territorial authorities. Tell them everything." The ascent felt like climbing toward her own execution. Tom stood with arms crossed, his hand resting near his revolver. For the first time in their marriage, Martha felt genuinely afraid of her husband. "You've put me in a difficult position, Martha," Tom said as she emerged. "I had hoped your curiosity could be redirected, but you've discovered things that cannot be undiscovered." "I've discovered that the man I married no longer exists," Martha replied, meeting his gaze directly. "I've seen the hell you've created while we lived comfortably above. That comfortable life was funded by the operation you condemn," Tom shot back defensively. "Do you think a sheriff's salary provided our house, your medical supplies? Everything we have exists because of difficult decisions I made." "There is still time to make this right," Martha said desperately. "We can release these people, expose the others. You still have a choice." Tom's laugh was bitter. "The only choice I have is whether you join our workforce voluntarily or meet with an unfortunate accident." Mayor Cartwright appeared in the doorway with two ranch hands. His expression carried false sympathy mixed with cold calculation. "Mrs. Harrison, I hope you can appreciate the delicate nature of our situation and the need for discretion," Cartwright said with manufactured warmth. Martha realized this moment would determine her fate and that of the 23 souls trapped below. "I understand perfectly. I understand that you are monsters who profit from human misery, and my knowledge makes me a threat you believe must be eliminated." Cartwright's false smile faded as he nodded to his men. Tom stepped back, abandoning his wife to the mayor's enforcers. But as the ranch hands reached for Martha's arms, the thunder of approaching horses shattered the tension. Multiple riders moved at speed toward the jailhouse, torches bobbing in the darkness. "Federal marshals," one ranch hand whispered urgently, "a whole posse." Cartwright's face went pale as their secret faced exposure by forces beyond their control. Tom drew his revolver, though his target remained unclear. The sound of boots on the jailhouse steps announced the arrival of federal authorities. As Martha Harrison smiled for the first time since descending into the tunnels, she realized that justice was finally coming to Redemption Creek, rising from the depths where it had been buried along with the truth.